Hi everyone, the Partial Prophet here. Thanks for tuning in. So I wanted to remind you that we know in part and we prophesy in part, and then when Jesus comes, we will see fully. Okay, so my title today is If My Calculations Are Correct, the Last Date. So this is actually kind of my prophecy update for the rest of November 2025. And I, I'm hoping this is the last date that I need to calculate and put in a video. Um, but we'll see. Um, so in the last video, the date that I was looking at was 11/9. Okay. Because I'm always looking at those 9/11 dates. Okay, 11/9 or 9/11. Okay. And as usual, Jesus didn't come back that date, and the riots that I was looking for in America didn't start on that date. But something very interesting happened on that date. So that was the 40th day of the shutdown, and 8 Democrats broke with their party to vote with the Republicans to end the shutdown. So up to that point, they have been being kind of stubborn and not voting to end the shutdown. And so this was kind of a miracle. And so I definitely think the hand of providence that God was ready to put an end to the shutdown. And then we saw, so then 11/9 through 11/12 was, let me see, I'm looking for my calendar, it was kind of all the different votes to end the shutdown. So that on 11/12 was, because like it starts with the Senate and moves to the House. Is that how it works? And so then the House moved, the vote ended up in the House on 11/12, and 6 House Democrats broke with their party to join Republicans in passing the bill, and then hours later, Trump signs the bill. So I think it's really interesting. I didn't highlight this, but it would have been interesting to highlight the number 8 for the Democrats in the Congress, and then the or in the Senate, and then the House Democrats, that there was 6. So we have those numbers 8 and 6. So remember I talked about that Trump is the 6th king that becomes the 8th king. So interesting to see those numbers. Okay. And so then I'm thinking that the end of the shutdown was fulfilling this prophecy in Daniel 4. So remember that Nebuchadnezzar is this big, proud tree. I think that this is the prophecy, and he gets cut down to be a stump. But then at some point in Daniel 4:36, it says, "At that time my reason returned to me, and my majesty and splendor were restored to me for the honor of my kingdom. And my state counselors and my nobles began seeking me out. So I was reestablished in my sovereignty, and surpassing greatness was added to me." So we know the first fulfillment of this prophecy was Trump got cut down after the deal of the century, like 70 weeks after the deal of the century. And then Biden came into power. And then there was kind of a reversal, because Biden had his Saudi deal, and so then God caused him to lose his power and Trump to return. Okay, but then for 40, so it was 42 days, we had this shutdown, so kind of like Trump lost a little bit of his power again. But then, God allowed everything to return back to normal for a time. Okay. And so that's what happened. Okay. And then, so the other fulfilled prophecy that I'm thinking that the end of the shutdown fulfills Daniel 9:27, And this is the one where it says, he will confirm a covenant with many for 1 week, but in the middle of that week he will bring sacrifices and offerings to a halt. On the wing of abominations will come one who destroys until the decreed end is poured out on the one who destroys. So, so I've been talking about this for a while, is that we don't really know who the he is confirming a covenant, but I have suspicions that that could be God, because it talks about like reaffirming a covenant, making a covenant stronger. And so what I was wondering is, so we read about 7 weeks in the book of Daniel, and so, and we saw after, so after Trump had his deal of the century, quote unquote, on January 28th, 2020, exactly 7 weeks later on a Tuesday was the start of the American shutdown for COVID. And so God brought judgment for Trump's quote unquote deal of the century. And then, so I was wondering, with Trump's current quote unquote peace plan, which someone had called the deal of the millennium, and so I kind of stole that title because it's nice and short. So that started on September 29th was when Trump and Netanyahu announced it. But we saw some other dates. So 10/10 was when the ceasefire started. 10/13 was when the hostages were released, and then Trump was actually over there in Israel, and then he went to Egypt. He signed some papers too in Egypt. Okay. And I think I might have a slide in my last video where, because they have these big signs that say peace and everything like that. So what I was wondering is if the covenant with many for 1 week is another 7-week time frame of judgment because of Trump's peace plans. Okay. And so what I wrote is that 11/9 is 28 days, or 4 weeks after 10/13/25. So if you have the 7 weeks going from 10/13 to 12/1, which I do, then you could say that the middle of that week would be the 3rd or the 4th week. So having the Democrats break with their party on 11/9 would be in the middle of those 7 weeks. Okay. And so then in the middle of those 7 weeks, there was an end to sacrifices and offerings, which would be kind of a metaphor for how the Democrats were causing the Americans to suffer for, like, so they apparently were trying to push for healthcare subsidies or whatever they were pushing for, by allowing the shutdown to continue to try to force their way. And so we saw there was an end put to that. So then we don't need to be looking for an antichrist who's making a covenant for 1 week, like a lot of the YouTube prophets are looking for. So because I think they're missing it, because I believe that Trump is the antichrist, and so I think they're missing it by waiting. Like they're coming with preconceived notions of what they think these verses, how they should be fulfilled. And I was actually listening to someone on YouTube last night, and he had actually made the point that that happened in the 1st century too, when Jesus came the first time, that they had preconceived notions of how the prophecies were going to play out. So they missed that Jesus was the Messiah. So we're definitely seeing a repeat of history with that. And so then I've talked about in the last couple of videos, I think, about I'm looking for rioting to happen in America. Okay. The other term that I used was like civil war. Um, and I shared in previous videos about some of the verses in the Bible that I think tell us that civil war is coming to America. Um, so, in the last couple of videos, or one of the videos, I talked about at the end of October how people were posting videos about pillaging Walmart and Costco if their food stamps were cut off. So we're definitely seeing um, people having kind of this rioting, pillaging mentality. Okay. Um, and so this is my chart from the last video. And so I talked about how with Trump's deal of the century, quote unquote, that 7 weeks later we had the COVID shutdown and that connected to Joseph being in prison. 120 days later we had the George Floyd riots and that connected to the Lion's Den. And then 190 days later was the explosion in Lebanon and that connected to the fiery furnace. So I was thinking that we could take a look at God's patterns to see what we might expect after Trump's deal of the millennium, quote unquote. Okay. And so we already saw that 3 days later, after this 9/29 date, there was a US shutdown. And so that parallels the COVID shutdown. So, really fast judgment on that one. And so then I was wondering if 42 days later we were going to see riots in the US on 11/9. And nope, that didn't happen. And then I'm wondering about a fiery furnace happening in Israel. Okay, so here's the updated chart. And so, like I said, 3 days later, we had the U.S. shutdown on 10/1. 42 days after the deal of the millennial was the vote to end the shutdown on 11/9. Stop to sacrificing grain offering. So that now I'm wondering if 7 weeks after 10/13 is when we'll see the riots in the United States show up, and that would be 12/1. Okay, and then I'm not sure when the fiery furnace would start in Israel. So that's what I'm looking for. Because we see in that Daniel 9 verse that, okay, so let's say that this verse is being fulfilled, and so we're in the middle of the 7-week covenant that God confirmed, and then we saw in the middle of this 7-week time frame an end to sacrifices and offerings, i.e., an end to the shutdown. So then what does it say? It says, on the wing of abominations will come one who destroys. So at the end of these 7 weeks, we're going to see a group of people that come who destroys. Okay, so is that the rioters? Okay, and then it says, until the decreed end is poured out on the one who destroys. Okay, so that is what is coming. Someone or something or a group of people are going to come that are going to destroy. Now, I do feel like we're already got a partial fulfillment of that with Trump, because I definitely think he's the destroyer too. Okay, so he's already bringing destruction to America. Okay, like for example, tearing down the White House, the east wing of the White House, and anyways, and other stuff he's been doing. So I definitely think he's a destroyer type. But I think the left is going to rise up in protest against Trump, and bring destruction to America. And I'll show you some things that kind of show their frame of mind. Okay. So what did I write here? 11/9. Okay, this is the same dates, right? We already talked about those dates. Okay. And so then another fulfilled prophecy. So in Daniel 4, we already talked about Daniel 4, where Nebuchadnezzar says, at that time my reason returned to me. And then he goes on to say, and my nobles began seeking me out. Okay. So I think we have been seeing that being fulfilled in the month of November, because what we had, so nobles are seeking Trump out. So what we had is on November 10th, Trump had the president of Syria at the White House. And so if you remember this guy, he used to be wanted for terrorism by America. And then all of a sudden he put a suit on, and all of a sudden he's considered a valid player in the marketplace. And so Trump has him over like he's a valid, I don't know, a valid leader. So I thought a good verse, a good prophetical fulfillment would be Esther 3:1, where it says, after these events, King Ahasuerus promoted Haman, the son of Hammedatha the Agagite. Okay, remember the Agagites wanted to kill the Jews, okay? And then it says, and advanced him and established his authority over all the princes who were with him, okay? And so America has been kind of instrumental in supporting this guy in Syria, okay? Okay, and so then moving on November 18th, the Saudi crown prince, okay? So remember that guy, the American intelligence, I believe, found out that he ordered the murder of that reporter, Chikozi, I don't know how you say the guy's name. And then the other thing that we need to remember about the Saudi crown prince is remember that some of the 9/11 terrorists were Saudi nationals. Okay, so are the Saudi people really our friends? And I heard today too that they actually think the Saudi crown prince has been killing people in his own country. Okay, so another murderer, okay, terrorist type person, okay, that Trump invites to the White House on November 18th. And look at that number too, 18666, okay. So then I was thinking that could be a fulfillment of Daniel 5, where Belshazzar the king held a great feast for 1,000 of his nobles, and he was drinking wine in the presence of the 1,000. Then they brought the gold vessels that had been taken out of the temple, the house of God, which was in Jerusalem, and the king and his nobles, his wives and his concubines drank from them. They drank the wine and praised the gods of gold and silver, of bronze, iron, wood, and stone. Okay, so it's interesting that it said they brought the gold vessels because when the Saudi prince came, they ate on gold rim plates. Okay, so I got some pictures coming up that I'll show you. So I definitely think we're seeing a fulfillment of these verses. Okay, and because what was interesting too is the dinner that that Trump had for the Saudi crown prince. He like invited all like the tech guys and just a bunch of billionaires, like people with money. So definitely interesting. So then on November 1st, Trump had the new mayor of New York, Mamdani, okay. He invited him to the White House. Okay, so what's interesting about this guy is he's a Muslim and a socialist. And they seem to get along and kind of have a bromance, and they kind of connected with the city of New York, and like similar interest. so so I thought that connected to Genesis 11 verses 1 and 5, where it says, now the whole earth used the same language and the same words. The Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the sons of men had built. Okay, so Mamdani would be like this, the city builder or whatever, and Trump would be the tower builder. Okay, and they like kind of are using the same language, okay? Like they're connecting on, let's make New York great again kind of concept, okay? Even though Mom Donnie thinks Trump is a, what do you call it? Um, uh, oh, I can't think of the word that he used, but one of those leaders that want to like take over, okay? And I guess Trump had said bad things about him too, but all of a sudden they get together and they're good friends. Um, so definitely interesting. Okay. So then, so here's the pictures from the Saudi Crown Prince. Okay. And so then I put in the verses from Revelation 18 that talk about Babylon. Okay. And it says, and he cried out with a mighty voice, saying, fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. For all the nations have drunk of the wine of the passion of her immorality, and the kings of the earth have committed acts of immorality with her, and the merchants of the earth have become rich by the wealth of her sensuality, to the degree that she glorified herself and lived sensuously. For she says in her heart, I sit as a queen, and I am not a widow, and will never see mourning. Okay, so I don't know how anyone can look at these pictures from November 18th and not see Babylon. To me, Babylon was like screaming out of these pictures. Okay, so on the left here, you got the prince and you got Trump. Okay, so this is at the White House, and so remember, Trump put gold all around the White House. Okay, and then they're sitting there in these golden looking chairs. Okay, to me that screams Babylon. Okay, and then also too, on the next slide I have the dollar amount that they're talking about with the deals they're trying to make. Okay, and then the picture on the right is the dinner. Okay, and so see how fancy it is, and see how you see gold everywhere. Um, and so, oh, my pictures didn't show up. Okay, so, but, um, I mean, it would be the same pictures. So, but I put in this sentence about the Saudi crown prince Mohammed bin Salman, whatever, MBS. They always have hard names to say. Announced an increase in Saudi investment in the United States from a 600 billion pledge to potentially $1 trillion. Okay, so first I thought it was interesting that it was a 600 billion because you got that six number there, but interesting that they want to increase it to 1 trillion. So definitely Babylon, definitely saying Babylon. So okay, fortunately these pictures turned out, because I tried to zoom in a little bit on to show you those golden plates that they're eating on. Does this not say Babylon to you? So, okay. So then in the Bible, we know in the last days, they're going to be saying peace and safety. Okay, so 1 Thessalonians 5 says, for you yourselves know full well that the day of the Lord will come just like a thief in the night. While they are saying peace and safety, then destruction will come upon them suddenly, like labor pains upon a woman with child, and they will not escape. Okay, so what I'm wondering, so I highlighted they, and in some of my previous videos, I thought the they might be Trump and Netanyahu, but we actually have a bunch of people saying peace and safety right now, besides just them. Because on November 17th, the UN voted to back Trump's peace plan for Gaza. Okay, quote unquote peace plan. And now they're talking about this 28 points peace, quote unquote peace plan or ceasefire for Ukraine. So that's being talked about. And then we have the Pope in the Middle East running around talking about peace. Okay, so a lot of people are running around saying peace right now. Okay, and then one of the things too to keep in mind, so when you compare the Gaza plan with the Ukraine plan, okay, like you start to see some similarities, and really, like, the complaint about the Gaza plan is that it favors Israel's enemies, okay? And then now they're saying the same thing about the 28-point plan for Ukraine favors Putin, okay? Because what's important to understand is that um, like Trump's language is not that much different than the people on the left, that he does not have a biblical worldview, because um, the people on the left, they don't have a biblical worldview either, and they think everyone is basically good inside, okay? And so we have Trump making these deals like everybody's on the same level, the same playing field, that there is no good and bad. It's not about good versus evil. It's about one, let me think what that word would be. Like, one person, one, I don't know, leader. Like, I'm trying to think of that word, like someone who would participate in the marketplace. Like that's how Trump sees everything. That it's one negotiator versus another negotiator or person that you're trying to negotiate with. Can't think of a good word. Um, so, so I found this verse in the Bible, Psalm 82, that says, so this is a God rebuking somebody, very possibly Trump, very possibly the Antichrist, because God says, "How long will you judge unjustly and show partiality to the wicked? Vindicate the weak and fatherless, do justice to the afflicted and destitute. They do not know, nor do they understand. They walk about in darkness. All the foundations of the earth are shaken." Um, so Trump in this plan is showing partiality to Putin when Putin was the aggressor. He was the one who started the war, and the Ukrainians are, for the most part, trying to defend themselves. So while they're saying peace and safety, then destruction will come upon them suddenly. Okay. So I wrote down 1 Thessalonians 5:3. I highlighted 5:3 because 5 plus 3 equals 8. So are we going to see the fulfillment of these verses during the time of the 8th king is a question. So here's the dates. So Pope also in the Middle East saying peace, 1127 and 12:2. And so we see the new Pope kind of repeating the old Pope, where it's kind of this one world religion and kind of the Rodney King kind of religion of why can't we all get along kind of thing. And so that's the Pope in the Middle East saying that. So, and not differentiating between Muslims and Christians, which is kind of weird for a Christian leader. So, and then I thought it was interesting too. Okay, so the 28 plan for Ukraine. So today on 11:30, they're actually meeting in Florida. Trump's negotiators, to try to work with Ukraine how to make this peace plan work, quote unquote. Because we saw so well how well the Gaza plan worked when, which I'm being sarcastic because it's kind of ironic we haven't really gotten to even point 2 of the Gaza 20. Well, I wrote 21-point plan, but it's up down to the 20-point plan. But we haven't even gotten to the second point, which involves Hamas putting down their weapons. And I am not naive enough to think that that is going to happen. And so what's ironic too about this 28-point plan for Ukraine is that while Trump and his cabinet or administration is running around trying to make this happen, Trump is in the process of like ramping up this war with Venezuela. Okay. So just really bizarre behavior to me. Are you a man of peace or are you a man of war? And why are you, forcing an uncomfortable peace plan on Ukraine when you're about to start a war in Venezuela? It just doesn't make sense. But we know in Matthew 24 that Jesus says you will be hearing of wars and rumors of wars. So we've definitely been hearing rumors about the U.S. preparing for war with Venezuela. Lots of um, clues that we might be headed in that direction. Um, so we know with Venezuela that, so up to this point, Trump has bombed 21 boats, okay, of supposed um, drug dealers, okay, and he's killed at least 83 people in these boats, okay. And something new just came out today too, where I guess Pete Hegseth. Um, so like the first bombing happened on 9/2, and not all the people died, and then Pete Hegseth supposedly said kill them all or whatever. So they're it's kind of coming out that they look hungry for blood. Okay, um, which doesn't surprise me because I think Trump is the Antichrist and this is the Antichrist system. Okay. But we're seeing that Trump's doing a buildup of U.S. military planes and warships near Venezuela. So, and then yesterday he said, so he actually like told people to avoid the airspace around Venezuela. So things are definitely ramping up. Okay, so this was his post, Chipocalypse post, Chipocalypse Now post that he posted on 9/6. Okay, so I circled in his post that he's changing the name of the Department of Defense to the Department of War, so you could see that he's got war in his heart. Okay, he talks about peace, and there's a verse too that talks about they talk about peace when there's war in their heart. Um, so um, so what I've been talking about is the Civil War setup in America, okay? Because it says a house divided against itself will not stand, and so I've been trying to kind of keep this list updated to see what would be the various topics that would set off this Civil War, okay? And so we've seen, okay, so these are things that are causing this country to be divided, and I probably don't have them all. And I don't know what the final spark is going to be that's going to start this war or rioting or whatever. But we definitely know that Trump putting the National Guard in various cities has been a very contentious issue. And then what's interesting too is that we've just had this, I mean, really sad that two of the National Guard in Washington, D.C. got shot the day before Thanksgiving. And so that makes Trump want to put even more National Guard in Washington, D.C., including like, so now they even want the police, the D.C. police to patrol with them. So that would be kind of a fulfillment of that verse that says, when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies. Okay. And then we know Trump's immigration policies are really contentious, and same thing with this shooting too. It's causing Trump to just get even tougher with his immigration policies. Okay. And then we had the Trump CDC cutting vaccines. I mean, so I think even today or yesterday in the news, they're changing the vaccine rules for the kids. So we have the kind of the fight between the left and the right about the left want to continue the health insurance subsidies. Trump keeps saying he's going to come up with his own health plan, but nobody really has faith that that's going to happen. So definitely contentious issues. The Jeffrey Epstein debacle, definitely contentious. Trump was trying to get the Democrats investigated with the Jeffrey Epstein thing. And what was interesting with the Jeffrey Epstein thing too was Trump got in a fight with Marjorie Taylor Greene, who was like one of his biggest cheerleaders, um, and um, and she actually didn't even say anything that bad about Trump related to the Epstein files, because she actually said she thought he was innocent or didn't do anything wrong. Um, um, but I don't know, they got in a fight, and so then Marjorie is talking about resigning. And so to me, that's another picture of 666 being played out, where, if you don't do everything right to make Trump happy, he's going to run you out of the marketplace. Okay. Um, so he's running Marjorie Taylor Greene out, or he ran her out, or whatever. And then we had this seditious, quote unquote, video of the 6 Democrats on 11/18, which is causing a division, and Trump wants. So I guess the FBI is planning to investigate these 6 Democrats, and I think there's one guy that they actually were going to take to court. And then, like I said, and then we have the war in Venezuela. It could be a contentious topic. Okay. I mean, because really, when you think about it, too, where, oh yeah, that was why I thought this Apocalypse Now post was interesting, because it connects to the Vietnam War, and so we saw back in the time frame of the Vietnam War, of the protests about the war. I think it was the Vietnam War. That we had a generation of people that were anti-war. Okay. And so those people are still around, and they raised kids to probably have the same mindset. Okay. And so definitely coming like full circle. So and then so I had some other examples of the Civil War setup, to help you kind of see the frame of mind of the people out there. So we have a group of people that were saying it's called Don't Shop Project 2025. And so they're saying, we're not asking, we're shutting it down. Mass blackout. November 25th through December 2nd, the largest economic blackout protest in U.S. history begins November 25th. So they want you to do no work, no spending, no restaurants, no projects, no events, and to shop local non-MAGA businesses. Okay. So they're saying no backing out, prepare for the impact. And so see too how they use a lot of like war type language. Okay. They said, to prevent spiked spending before and after the blackout, we ask that all participants purchase goods needed from community-owned stores and markets leading up to and after the dates. This helps with sustained impact and keeps our money out of the mega businesses' pockets. Coordinated national pushback, maximum local impact. Like, so kind of interesting. They want to, they're trying to bring down the big businesses. Okay, because they probably connect like the big businesses with Trump. And so anyways, definitely interesting. Like it, I don't think I'd be able to buy the food that I need from community-owned stores. So, anyways, so definitely interesting. So, and then when I was doing research on that, I found the 50501 movement, which I don't really know anything about, but they talked about boycott companies on Black Friday for diversity issues. So I actually didn't put that on my chart. I should add that. The DEI issues is definitely another contentious issues. Okay, so Black Friday blackout. On Black Friday, shop local, flex your money muscles and boycott these companies: Amazon, Target, Walmart, and let's see, avoid small businesses. I think Home Depot might be the other one. Oh, yeah, because it's down here: Amazon, Target, Home Depot. Boycott Walmart. So this connects to the same kind of language that we were hearing with, they were going to go after those stores, Walmart, Costco, if they didn't get their food stamps. Okay. Um, Black Friday is the most obnoxious thing created by the country. Well, besides MAGA. Okay, is what they wrote. Um, let's see, avoid small MAGA businesses. So apparently there's small MAGA businesses too. Boy, it sure makes shopping hard. You have to research all the political bent of the places you shop at. So the grassroots economic activist group, the People's Union USA, is calling for the boycott of 4 brands: Amazon, Target, Home Depot, and Walmart, I'm assuming. So that's kind of their mindset there. And then this is on the other side of the aisle. This is Benny Johnson, who's a conservative, like definitely a big pro-Trump supporter, I believe. And so here's what he posted. This was just a couple days ago. America is under attack from within. The greatest threats against our country are not coming from a foreign land, they're coming from inside our own borders. Leftist extremist terrorism is now part of everyday life. It's killing our children at school, our generational political leaders on campus, shooting our presidential candidates in the head in broad daylight, and viciously attacking our U.S. military, federal law enforcement, and police. This is an all-out war on law, order, and the safety of everyday Americans. The hysterical, violent rhetoric spewed by the left and the media is being acted upon by Democrats across the country. It's only escalating. When will enough be enough in just the past year? So before I read his list, what I think is ironic is that, okay, so aren't you, by posting this, also spewing some hysterical, violent rhetoric? Okay. So here's his list. Okay. The seditious 6 Democrats, using words from Trump, okay, claiming President Trump telling the military to not follow orders. I think that's very poorly worded, but the video telling the military to not follow Trump's orders. Jay Jones openly fantasizing about murdering Republicans and their children, wins election in Virginia. President Trump experiencing 2 assassination attempts. Charlie Kirk assassinated on live TV. The left celebrated. I don't know if he was actually on TV. It might have just been live streamed. Maybe he was on Fox. I don't really know. Attacks on ICE officers have skyrocketed over 1,000%. So I've definitely seen, like I said, that the ICE thing and the immigration thing has definitely been a contentious issue. So this might be a exaggeration, but there's a little bit of truth in that. LA riots and terror attacks, leftist sniper murders, 3 at ICE facility in Texas, massive violent riots at ICE facility in Broadview, Illinois, and Portland, Oregon. Annunciation Catholic Church, children shot while praying by left-wing Trump-hating transgender activists. Do we know that guy was Trump-hating? I'm not sure. Maybe. And then ABC News station shut up. Alina Haba attacked. I don't remember that story. Ed Martin attacked. Don't remember that story. Rogue judges releasing career criminals back onto the streets, terrorizing Americans. Okay, a little bit of truth with that. Okay. Now an ambush attack on the National Guard protecting DC. If we do not recognize the scale of this threat and take it seriously, we will lose everything. Okay, like that's not an exaggeration. The time to destroy the leftist terrorism industry and ideology is now. Okay, he doesn't go into details of how, um, you know, which I guess leaves it up to people's imaginations. Okay, so that's the thinking on the other side. Okay, um, and then also this weekend, I don't know. I guess a lot of people want to show their colors on Thanksgiving weekend. I mean, instead of staying home and spending time with family and thanking God, there's other things going on. So there's this group putting on this conference. It's called Beyond Survivor Resisting Genocide. Okay, and they said it's the 18th Palestine Convention, which I thought it was interesting. They have that 18 number because I always think of 666 when I think of 18. Okay, so this was November 27th to 29th in Tinley Park, Illinois. PalestineConvention.org, the largest gathering for Palestine in the U.S. Definitely very interesting. So definitely people showing their colors. Okay. So in Mark, we read about Mark 13, we read about when you see the abomination of desolation standing where it should not be, let the reader understand. Then those who are in Judea must flee to the mountains. But pray that it may not happen in the winter, for those days will be a time of tribulation such as not occurred since the beginning of the creation which God created until now, and never will. Unless the Lord had shortened those days, no life would have been saved. But for the sake of the elect whom he chose, he shortened the days. So I think the first fulfillment of this is because I think Trump returning to office is a type of abomination of desolation. Okay, because it happens on a 1290 day, and we'll get into that in a coming up slide. But then I'm wondering if the rioting or the slash civil war is maybe this abomination of desolation. Okay, standing where it should not be. Okay, so then if you're in Judea, which means you belong to Jesus, flee to the mountains. Okay, flee to Jesus. Okay, and so then it says, pray that it may not happen in the winter. So what's really interesting is, so in Matthew, I think it says, pray that it not happen on the Sabbath or in the winter. Because I think the first one, the Sabbath was October 7th, the war in Israel. Okay. And so then I think the second one is going to happen in the winter. Okay. And so what we saw is, okay, so on the Hebrew calendar, they consider the 9th month the start of winter. Okay, and so that started on 11/21 is the first day of the month of Kislev. Okay, so now we're in winter in Israel. Okay, and then this is Luke's. So Luke is the only one. So Matthew and Mark actually talk about the abomination of desolation. But Luke is the one who talks about when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then know that its desolation has come near. So we're seeing these armies in Washington, D.C. Okay, then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Okay, so that would be Jesus's people, flee to Jesus. Let those who are inside the city depart. Okay, and let those who are out in the country, and let not those who are out in the country enter it. So what I'm thinking is, so Trump's kind of in power right now, and so him and his people would be the ones inside the city, and then Biden and his people would be the ones out in the country or in the wilderness. Okay, because it says, for these are days of vengeance to fulfill all that is written. So we're definitely, so I think what we're going to see is the left taking out vengeance on the right, and vice versa, the right taking out vengeance on the left. Okay, and then it says, alas for women who are pregnant and who are nursing infants in those days. So the Trump followers would be the ones that are nursing infants in those days. Like, like Trump is the baby. Okay. And then, for there will be great distress upon the earth and wrath against this people. They will fall by the edge of the sword and be led captive among all nations, and Jerusalem will be trampled underfoot by the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. So definitely could be another picture about the riots or the Civil War. I'm wondering if we're going to see 3 days of darkness, that where we see the fulfillment of Jerusalem being trampled. Okay. I mean, we already know about Jerusalem being trampled for 42 months, and I believe that was fulfilled by Biden. Okay, so time frames in Daniel 9. Okay, so Daniel talks about, he reads about 70 years in the book of Jeremiah. Okay. But then he has an angel that comes and tells him about other time frames to be looking for. Okay. That might be Gabriel. Gabriel maybe comes to tell him about other time frames. And so what we saw with the 70 years is that was when the 70th year of Israel was when Trump moved the American embassy to Jerusalem. But then Gabriel told Daniel to look for other time frames such as 70 weeks. Okay, so I have some thoughts about the 70th week. Okay, so we saw with Trump's deal of the century on January 28, 2020, that exactly 70 weeks, 2 days later, that was when, so Trump was already kind of out by then, but Netanyahu was kicked out on 6/2/2021, and actually on 6/4/2021, but still in the 70th week, 4 days. Trump was, I think that's when he was kicked off of Facebook, some social media or whatever. So they had a lot of power, and then boom, their power was taken away. Okay. But we saw a repeat. So remember, look for God's patterns. So Biden had his Saudi quote unquote deal on 8/9/2023, and then 70 weeks, 2 days later, that was when Trump was named Times Person of the Year. So, so Biden losing his power as Trump's moving into power. Okay. So then Biden had a hostage deal on 11/21/23, which was 70 weeks, 6 days after his paper that he signed with Lapid. So another 70-week fulfillment. Okay. Another time frame in Daniel 9 is 7 weeks. Okay, so sometimes I wonder if 7 weeks could be 7 years, because we saw when Biden signed his paper with Lapid was exactly to the day 7 years after Obama's JCPOA, his Iran deal, Iran quote unquote deal, or forget what they call it. And because it's interesting, you got to kind of pay attention when things get repeated on the same dates. Okay. But 7 weeks after the deal of the century was start of the COVID shutdown. We talked about that. And so then 7 weeks after 10/13 is going to be 12/1. Okay, so is that going to be a fulfillment of one of these time frames in Daniel? 62 weeks, okay, is another time frame in Daniel 9. Okay, so this one on January 7th, 2021, Biden's electoral college vote happened, which was 62 days after 11/7. So on 11/7, Biden was declared the winner of that election, and then 62 days later, they had the electoral college vote. Which, what was really interesting about that is it was supposed to happen on January 6th, but because Trump's people, made a mess of the Capitol, it ended up being postponed a day. So I thought that was fascinating because otherwise it would have happened on the 61st day. And then when Netanyahu was out on 6/2/21, you could see kind of a hidden 62. So I think that number 62 connects to, like the new person, well, a person either losing power or a new person moving in. Because we see elsewhere, there's another place in Daniel where it says, Darius the Mede received the kingdom at the age of 62. Okay. So another clue as to, look for the number 62. Okay. So then Trump's electoral college vote on 12/17/24 was the 62-week fourth day of the war. So definitely interesting. I don't know if I came up with the 62 that connects to December 1st. But that would definitely be a big clue that we're shifting leadership. So this is a really important date, 12/12/24. That was when Donald Trump was named Time Person of the Year. Okay, so the Hebrew date was Kislev 11. Okay, the 9th month on the Hebrew calendar, the 11th day, so 9/11. Okay, which, by the way, is Biden's Hebrew birthday. So I thought that was interesting. What's interesting about 12/12/24 is that you could get 8 6s out of that. So that's interesting because Trump's moving from being the 6th king to the 8th king. And then, like I said, Kislev 11 is a 9/11. Or they write their dates like it would be like 11/9, the way they write their dates. Okay. And okay, so person of the year, President-elect Donald Trump has been named Time Magazine's 2024 Person of the Year. The choice, it comes after an improbable resurrection following his first term in a successful re-election campaign, during which he was convicted of a crime and survived 2 assassination attempts. So definitely interesting choice of words from Time Magazine. So what's very interesting about this date is that it was 90 days from that 6/2/21 day where Netanyahu was out, the 70th week date, and which is the date for the abomination of desolation, which we'll see on the next slide. And then, like I said, Kislev 11, that happened on Biden's Hebrew birthday. So I guess like, happy birthday, Biden. You're gone, Trump's in. Which I think is the fulfillment of Genesis 40, where it's like the cupbearer is restored. That would be Trump. And then the baker is, he's out. But I think we're going to see like a second fulfillment where now Jesus is going to be the cupbearer that gets restored and Trump is the baker that would be out. Okay. And so, and then also, okay, so I think I already talked about this. Did I talk about this on this slide? The 70th. Oh, maybe not. Let's see. Yeah. Yeah, Trump's deal of the century, 70. Oh, wait. That's not what I'm talking about. Okay, trying to keep track of all these. Okay, so 12/12 was the 70th week, 2 days after Biden's Saudi deal. Okay, maybe it was on that slide. I don't know. Okay, so then this is a slide showing the 1290. Okay, so we read about it in Daniel 12:11. Which is kind of interesting. It's like one verse off, like, December 12th, 12/12 was when Trump was named Times Person of the Year. But the verse where it talks about the 1290 days is 12/11. So that was kind of interesting. Sometimes it like happens exactly, but this one's just like a little bit off. I don't know if the Hebrew Bible has it. I think I might have looked that up and I think it's still the same numbering. So in Daniel 12:11, it says, "From the time that the regular sacrifice is abolished and the abomination of desolation is set up, there will be 90 days." Okay, so this is where, um, so I think there's two different time frames of 90 days that shows us that Trump is the abomination of desolation. Okay, um, because, okay, um, so Trump's DOC, well, so Trump's deal of the century was one of the abomination that causes desolation, because that was 90 days after the RNC in 2016. We had Biden with the Saudi deal was 90 days after the deal of the century, and that happened on Obama's birthday, which is interesting. And then, so then I have kind of the week um, time frames of the judgments and various things that happened after their deals. Okay, so like I said, with Trump's deal of the century, you had the COVID shutdown on week 7. Week 17 was the BLM rioters. Week 27 was the fiery furnace, which was also on Obama's birthday. Like that one was actually on his Gregorian birthday. Week 49 was the January 6th, the January 6th riot. And then we had Biden's electoral college on January 7th. And then on January 8th was when they kicked Trump off of Twitter. And then, like I said, week 70, Netanyahu was out. Trump was off of Facebook and Twitter. I think actually Netanyahu was out on 6/2 and then Trump off of Facebook and Twitter on 6/4. But then 90 days after the 6/2 date is 12/12/24 when Trump was named Person of the Year. So now it's like Trump is the abomination of desolation. Okay. Because we also saw on July 18th, 2024, that when Trump spoke on the last day of the RNC, that was 90 days after January 6th. So very interesting. Okay. So both, the deals being abominations of desolation, but also the like Trump the person is an abomination of desolation. I mean, abomination of desolation would be like something that offends God that ends up causing destruction and desolation. And then, like I said, with Biden's Saudi deal, so we saw similar things. Like week 8 was when the war started in Israel. So his deal ended up bringing this war in Israel, okay, because they weren't paying attention. They were thinking they were running around talking about peace when this war happened. And American troops were attacked in Syria and Iraq. And then on week 36, we saw pro-Palestinian protesters. Week 42, we entered into a fiery furnace type phase in America. Week 46 was the debate, and which was really kind of the big downfall of Biden. Trump was shot on week 48, which actually was a bad thing for Biden because people kind of saw him more as a messianic type figure after surviving being shot. Week 49, Biden had COVID. Trump was at the RNC. Biden dropped out of the campaign. And then week 70, I didn't list everything, just kind of the highlights. Week 70, day 2 was 12/12. Like I said, Biden pardons, but that was also when Trump was named Times Person of the Year. Okay. So then I want to talk about the date 12/1. What we saw in 2022, we saw fulfillment of Daniel 12/1 on this date, 12/1. So it's always interesting when the verse numbers actually end up literally being fulfilled. Because it says, "Now at that time, Michael, the great prince who stands over the sons of your people, will arise, and there will be a time of distress such as never occurred since there was a nation until that time." Okay, so we saw Trump return. I mean, we saw Netanyahu return to power after the 70th week. he was able to come back on 12/1/2022. He was able to put a coalition together. Okay. And so he arose, he had a resurrection type uh, dealy too, where he returned to power. And we did see that ever since he returned to power, there was distress in America. I mean, in Israel. Because there's a lot of people that really hate the Netanyahu government. And then that's when the war started too. Um, like less than a year, I guess, after he returned to power. Okay, because that would be 10/7/23. And then so it was funny. I saw at that time, I was like, oh my gosh, he's really fulfilling Daniel 12:1. But I didn't realize. So now there's this green highlighted part of the verse. It was like, well, wait a minute. And then it says, and at that time, your people, everyone who's found written in the book, will be rescued. So I realized there's a second fulfillment to this verse with Messiah, okay? Because, so Messiah could also be fulfilling, could be the Michael that arises, who stands guard over the sons of your people, the Jewish Messiah arising. And then at that time, Daniel's people who were found written in the book will be rescued. Okay. So that's why I'm really looking at this 12/1/2025 date. Okay. Is it, is Jesus going to fulfill it literally by returning on 12/1/2025, like Netanyahu fulfilled it literally? But I also too wonder if, like, maybe you got to read the rest of, like, Daniel 12:2 and then Daniel 12:3, because maybe it wouldn't be 12/1. Well, because I'm not sure if there's like 3 days of rioting, like December 1st, December 2nd, December 3rd, and then maybe Jesus comes back on the third day of rioting, December 3rd. Because let me read this to you. Daniel 12, the other two verses. So Daniel 12:2 says, many of those who sleep in the dust of the ground will awake, these to everlasting life, but the others to disgrace and everlasting contempt. So we see two groups of people in that Daniel 12:2, where those who, some rise up to everlasting life, and then others rise up for disgrace and contempt. Okay. Which, coming out of the dust, that would be like maybe Biden's people. Okay. And then Daniel 12:3 says, those who have insight will shine brightly like the brightness of the expanse of heaven, and those who lead the many to righteousness like the stars forever and ever. So that could definitely be a messianic verse. Jesus would be one of those. Jesus would be the one, the insight to shine brightly. And so that's Daniel 12:3. Okay. So, maybe Jesus will return on December 1st, or maybe he'll return on December 2nd, or maybe he'll return on December 3rd. And I'll talk about the December 3rd date. But let's read, so let's look at Revelation 12:1, because there's that 12:1 number again. And so this is actually 12:1-2. It says, a great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. And she was with child, and she cried out, being in labor and in pain to give birth. This is another verse where I'm like, maybe it's a couple days. We want to look at December 12th. December 1 or 2 or 3, because like this woman clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet would be like the church who births the Messiah. Okay. And so maybe there's like a 3-day time of labor before we see the Messiah. Not that we have not been in labor, we've definitely been in increasing labor pains, but maybe there's this last 3 days of darkness, rioting, that bursts the Messiah. Okay. So we'll just have to wait and see. So if, because I don't know if the riots start and Jesus comes back at the same time, or if the riots start and then Jesus returns on the third day of rioting. So sometimes when I read some verses where it's like, oh, maybe it's the same time frame, and then I read other verses like this Revelation 12, where it's like, maybe it's a couple days after the rioting start. So if the rioting starts, hang in there, and there's no Jesus, just hang in there because he's going to show up in a couple days. Okay. Like the third day. So, um, so let's talk about 12/1, this date. Okay. So it's interesting because, and it says, and then there would be a time of distress such as never occurred since there was a nation until that time. I mean, maybe, Biden's returning on 12/1, him and his people, which would be causing, or Obama even too, yeah, which might be more likely anyways, and so then causing this time of distress. Okay. So what's interesting about this 12/1/2025 is it's 3 years after Netanyahu. So that was one thought I had about, because we read about like Jesus kind of resurrecting on the third day. So that could be the third year of Netanyahu could be considered like a third day. Okay. But I guess it doesn't have to happen exactly on that day, but we'll see what happens. Let's see. So in my notes, I, just want to make this other comment, is we see in Revelation 11:12, where it says, and they heard a loud voice from heaven saying to them, come up here. Then they went up into heaven in the cloud, and their enemies watched them. So I thought it was interesting that we got that number 12, Revelation 11:12, because maybe that connects to 12:1. And so a loud voice from heaven saying, come up here, could be something that Trump says to start the civil war. And so then his people go up into heaven in the cloud, which I see the cloud as being kind of the delusional influence of Trump. Okay, and then it says their enemies watch them. And there could be two fulfillments for that verse. Because then it could be Jesus saying, a loud voice from heaven could be Jesus saying, come up here. And then going up into heaven in the cloud could be, like Jesus's people being put under like a booth of protection. Okay. So that their enemies can't get to them. Okay. Can't touch them. Okay. Because then Revelation 11:13 actually says, and in that hour there was a great earthquake, a tenth of the city fell, 7,000 people were killed in the earthquake. So, so that could be something to consider too. But on Kislev, so on 12/1, it's also, so like I said, it's the 7 weeks after October 13th, like the 50th day or the first 1 month 19th day, which is another place where you see that 9/11 number, a hidden 9/11. It's 7 weeks 4 days after 10/10, so maybe something about a middle of the week kind of thing. 2 years after the start of Biden's hostage deal on the Hebrew date. Okay. So he had his hostage deal for Gaza. That happened on Kislev 11. And like I said, it's Biden's Hebrew birthday, so he's, 80, he's already 83 because his Gregorian birthday is November 20th. So like I said, it's the 9/11 Hebrew date, but they also write it 11/9, which could be significant because then it could show that it's like the reverse of 9/11. Okay, if Jesus comes back on that date. Okay. And then it's 1 year after Trump was named Times Person of the Year on the Hebrew date. And so the reason why I think that's significant is I talked about in my last video or the one before about um, Isaac, the son of promise, comes 1 year after Ishmael is considered by God, where Abraham tells God to, consider Ishmael. And so God said, okay, I will bless him, but you're supposed to be looking for Isaac. Okay. Um, and then 12:1 is also 2 years after they returned to war on the Gregorian date in 2023. So Biden had his hostage deal was like in November, and then they returned back to war on 12/1/2023. And 12/1 is also the 1335 day after Bennett, who was the prime minister of Israel for a short time in between Netanyahu's terms. So he was like the guy on the left, maybe like kind of like a Biden equivalent over there. And because we see in Daniel 12, it says it's blessed if you make it to the 1335 date. And then it was also, okay, so 12/1 is also 70 days after Trump was at the UN, okay? So Trump was at the UN on 9/23, 2025, which was like exactly 10 years after Obama was with the Pope on Yom Kippur in 9/23, 2015, okay? So like I said, it's always interesting when dates get kind of repeated. And then, so 12/1 is also 1777 days after Biden's inauguration, 99 months, 11 days from the Great American Solar Eclipse, 70 months and 4 days from Trump's deal of the century, 66 months and 6 days from the BLM riots. That's interesting, like you have 666 there. 62 months and 17, oh, there's that 62 number I was looking for. 62 months, 17 days from Trump's peace signings on 9/15/2020. Okay, so that 62 number could show you that we're having a change in leadership. But it is like 62 months, so you have kind of a whole month time frame where that could be fulfilled. 12/1 is 120 weeks, 6 days from the Saudi deal. So that could be a fulfillment of, in Genesis, before the great flood, God says, I'm only going to give him 120 days. And so, this could be showing you how, like the final judgment on Biden and his people, his followers. And you could see kind of a hidden 666 there too, 120 weeks, 6 days. Okay. And then 12/1 is also 70 weeks, 4 days from the 2 witnesses at Mar-a-Lago. That's when Trump and Netanyahu met at Mar-a-Lago. So we were seeing kind of the start of the return of the 2 witnesses. That was on 7/26/24, because it was like right after the RNC. So, Trump's starting to kind of return to power. I mean, we know Netanyahu kind of returned to power in 2022. So, and then Kislev 11 could also be a 3/11, which the significance of 3/11 is in 2020. That was when the when COVID was declared a pandemic. Okay. And then what's interesting about 12/1, it's 1 day after the first Sunday of Advent. Okay. So definitely interesting. But then, so what makes this hard is you have this date like, whoa, look at all these numbers kind of match up. And I didn't even finish all my calculating for 12/1, but I definitely have plenty, so that's why it's a high watch date. And so I guess I'll be really surprised if nothing happens. But what's interesting, okay, so then there's always these other dates where it's like, well, maybe because December 3rd which is Kislev 13, is 66 days after 9/29, which was when Trump and Netanyahu announced, um, this quote unquote deal of the millennium. Because we find that number 66 in Leviticus 12. Oh, which I didn't even think about that. Leviticus 12 kind of connects to, um, December again, okay, or repeat of, But Leviticus 12:1, it just says, then the Lord spoke to Moses. That's the whole verse right there. And then verse 2 says, speak to the sons of Israel, saying, when a woman gives birth and bears a male, she will be unclean for 7 days. As in the days of her menstruation, she shall be unclean. So the 7 days could connect to these 7 weeks, okay? And then it says, on the 8th day, the flesh of his foreskin shall be circumcised. But 7 days could also connect to Biden. And then the 8th day, the flesh of his foreskin shall be circumcised. Could be Biden losing power while Trump, the 8th king, returns. And then it says, she shall remain in the blood of her purification for 33 days. So I'm not really sure what that 33 days is. But it goes on to say, if she bears a female child, she will remain in the blood of your purification for 66 days. So that's, December 3rd. What the other thing about December 3rd is that it's 11 months, 9 days from Christmas. Okay. It was like Christmas and the first day of Hanukkah, which the rabbis point out that this year, December of 2025, there's actually like 2 Hanukkahs. So because Hanukkah kind of at the end of last year spilled over into the beginning of this year, and then we have Hanukkah in the middle of December this year, we're like in a year of 2 Hanukkahs. So that's definitely really interesting. So obviously, if we don't see anything at the beginning of this month, Kislev 11, December 1st, 2nd, or 3rd, then the other dates, then we have Hanukkah coming up on December 15th, or Hanukkah Eve is December 14th. And then, of course, there's Christmas on December 25th. Which December 1st, there's kind of a hidden, so the date of December 1st, too, also kind of has a hidden date of Christmas in there. Because, okay, so it'd be 12/1/2025. So if you take the 1 and add it to the 2 of 2025, you have 12/12/25. So kind of a hidden Christmas number there. So I don't know if that means anything. We'll see what happens. And so, so I talked about this in my last couple videos about, they were about to get into the land, and Rachel suffered severe labor, and, she gives birth to Benjamin, but she calls Benjamin the son of my sorrow, and her husband calls Benjamin son of my right hand. And so could be a picture of, as her soul was departing, she has a son. This would connect to, like the people nursing babies and then a baby actually being born. So, Trump could be the son of my sorrow, whereas the Messiah could be the son of my right hand. Okay. But Israel journeys past the Tower of Eder. So we move past Trump's tower. Okay. Anyways, so I think the truth is Jesus is coming back. Synchronize your watches. Okay. I thought that was cute. And then, so we see how 9/11 is like we see the hidden clues of 9/11 and Back to the Future. So another reason why I look for 9/11. So 2 trees could, connect to 9/11. But we saw that Trump and Netanyahu announced the peace deal on 9/29, which is a hidden 9/11. Um, so I don't know if I'll go. I already talked about all these verses in my last video. I didn't know if I wanted to talk about any of them. Um, so, but we do know that in the plagues, the 3 days of darkness were preceded by the locusts. So it could be two plagues that kind of talk about the same sort of thing, of the rioting slash civil war. Um, but the sons of Israel all have light in their homes, okay? Um, so there's a lot of promises. I mean, I talk about the promises too, um, that God has where, um, like Psalm 91 and Psalm 57 would be good things to encourage you if, rioting breaks out in America. Psalm 57:1 says, "And in the shadow of your wings I will take refuge until destruction passes by." Um, and then Psalm 91 talks about, okay, you will not be afraid of the terror by night, or of the arrow that flies by day, of the pestilence that stalks in darkness, or the destruction that lays waste at noon. 1,000 may fall at your side, and 10,000 at your right hand, but it shall not approach you. You will only look on with your eyes and see the recompense of the wicked. For you have made the Lord your refuge, the Most High your dwelling place. No evil will befall you, nor will any plague come near your tent. Okay, so definitely good promises there. Um, and so remember the picture of the Passover where it says it's a Passover sacrifice to the Lord, who passed over the houses of the sons of Israel in Egypt when he smote the Egyptians but spared our homes. Okay, so definitely a prophetic shadow. Okay, and then remember that Jesus says, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up." Okay, so if we see destruction, Jesus is going to raise it up when he returns. And then this was the verse, Genesis 17. That's where, Abraham says to God, "Oh, that Ishmael might live before you." Um, and so Trump is definitely a fulfillment of Ishmael. But God said, "No, no, no, no. Sarah, your wife, will bear you a son, and you will call him Isaac." So my covenant I will establish with Isaac, whom Sarah will bear to you at the season next year. So some time frame, a year after Trump returns to power, we will see the birth of the Messiah, the return of the Messiah. And so that's why I'm looking at this December 1st date, because it's 1 year after the 12/12 when Trump was named Time Man's Person of the Year. So we saw in Back to the Future 2 another 9/11 where Einstein's clock 11/8 changes to 11/9. And I had a thought, but now I don't remember what 11/8 could connect to. But remember the Kislev 11, they write it like 11 Kislev. And so 11, 119, could be showing you 11 Kislev. Okay. What did I write? 11/9 is Chesfon 18 vote to end shutdown. 12/1 is Kislev 11. Okay, like I said, they write 11 Kislev. So, anyways, so I think we might be out of time. Of course, I've been saying this for like 3 years now. And I'm always wrong. So if I'm wrong again, I'm sorry. But I wanted to get these down in case it happens so you'll understand, what's being fulfilled, in the Bible. And then some's got to be happening because Trump's running around with this hat that says 45-47, which is 9/11 if you add them up, So, anyways, and 47 is interesting because it adds up to 11. And like I said, 11 is the number of judgment. And so this was Second Thessalonians 2:4. We saw Trump setting, setting himself up, taking a seat in the temple, like setting himself up in Gaza, um, like as a leader of Gaza, but then also he was going to head the board of peace for Gaza. Um, so, but I did want to say it says, let no one in any way deceive you, okay? So don't let Trump deceive you by the fact that he's doing these signs, okay? Um, so, because he's a false prophet, okay? Jeremiah 9:11 says, I will make Jerusalem a heap of ruins, a haunted jackals, and I will make the cities of Judah a desolation without inhabitants. So that's like we see kind of a hidden lion's den and a hidden fiery furnace. Okay, so here's the verse where I wanted to say, for false Christs and false prophets will arise and show great signs and wonders so as to mislead, if possible, even the elect. So all these people are running around thinking Trump is accomplishing peace. And so Trump actually said that so the Ukraine deal would be like the 8th country that he quote unquote brought peace to, I think, which would be fascinating to me since I think he's the 8th king. Okay, but how true are these peace, deals? Okay. I mean, we're definitely seeing the one. I haven't really followed the other ones, but we definitely know the one in Israel is not really working at all. So, but we got to remember that when we have a false prophet doing great signs and wonders, that's an hour of testing. Okay. Don't follow him, especially if he says, let us go after other gods. And we know that Trump doesn't have a biblical worldview. He doesn't believe in good and evil. Okay. He thinks everyone's all basically the same, which is not what the Bible teaches. And then if you mourn the destruction of Jerusalem, which, I think Jerusalem is a prophetic shadow of America, will mirror it, seeing it rebuilt with the coming of Moshiach. Okay. So we see Rachel weeping for her children, but God says, restrain your voice from weeping and your eyes from tears, for your work will be rewarded, and they will return from the land of the enemy. There is hope for your future, declares the Lord, and your children will return to their own territory. So definitely good promises, okay, to hang on to if we're in the middle of 3 days of darkness, okay? And so you don't want to turn to the right or to the left, okay? You want to stay in the middle with Jesus, okay? Because remember the left, the disciples, there was a dispute among them as to which one of them was regarded to be the greatest. So we've been seeing that with the left and the right, this big dispute between the two sides. And so stay in the middle in the dry land with Messiah. It talks about the great city, America, will split into 3 parts. Okay, you want to be in the middle with Messiah. Stand by and see the salvation of the Lord. Okay, so that's where we're at. If my calculations are correct. So if not, we'll have to do like we did with the last date of 11/9 of, Jesus didn't return, but something did happen. So we'll see what happens. So stay tuned. So thanks for listening. I appreciate you tuning in. And at least, I hope you're at least seeing how we've been fulfilling prophecies. So we're so close. And I mean, I really think if not, within the next day, definitely sometime this month, we're going to see the return of the Messiah. As I talked about that, 2025, just reminds me of the Christmas date. And so I just really think we're going to see Jesus. So we have 1 month left for Jesus to return. So, is what I'm thinking. I think I'd be really surprised if it goes on any further. Because it seems like everything is in place. I'm not sure what else we need in place. I mean, we see 666 being fulfilled in a metaphorical sense. We got all the people running around saying peace and safety. We got really the Civil War setup is in place. So um, we got we're under God's judgment because of Trump's quote unquote peace plans. So I just think it's very near. Um, so hang in there. Be blessed. Be encouraged that Jesus is right around the corner. Yes, times are hard right now because we're under those labor pains. And I mean, it's just bad news all the time. Um, and but remember when people were asking Jesus, like, why was this kid born blind? And Jesus said, to glorify God. And so if you're wondering why bad things are happening right now, a lot of it could be when Jesus comes, he's going to heal these people and bring glory to God. And so keep that in mind. Um, hopefully that will encourage you to hang in there, and if you're struggling with something right now, hang in there because it could be that Jesus is going to come and heal it. Um, so that's what I think. So I just pray for God's grace for you to wait and attain um, until Jesus returns. Okay, so God bless. Thanks for listening.